Let us begin a journey through the vast and complex history of the Islamic religion, from its origins in the harsh deserts of Arabia to its global influence that continues to shape billions of lives today. This story spans centuries, civilizations, dynasties, revolutions, and revelations. It begins not in battle or empire, but in a cave, where a man seeking truth withdrew from the noise of Meccan life, only to encounter something far beyond what he imagined. In the early 7th century CE, the Arabian Peninsula was a land of tribes, trade, and tradition. The city of Mecca, located in present-day Saudi Arabia, was a bustling commercial hub and religious center. At its heart stood the Kaaba, a cube-shaped structure believed to have been built by the prophets Abraham and Ishmael. But by this time, it was surrounded by idols, 360 in all, each one representing a different tribal deity. Mecca's economy thrived in part because of the annual pilgrimages made by tribes from across Arabia who came to worship at the Kaaba. Meccan society was tribal, honor-based, and deeply polytheistic. Tribal loyalty mattered more than anything else. Bloodlines and protection determined one's safety and status. It was a world where social injustice was rampant. Women were often treated as property, infanticide was not uncommon, slavery was normal, and the poor and orphans had little recourse. Poetry and oral storytelling were the pride of the people, and poets were revered as the voice of the tribe. It was in this setting, in the year 570 CE, that Muhammad ibn Abdullah was born into the Quraysh tribe, one of Mecca's most powerful clans. Orphaned at a young age, he was raised by his grandfather and then by his uncle, Abu Talib. As he grew, Muhammad became known for his honesty and trustworthiness, earning the nickname Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy. He worked as a merchant and later married a wealthy widow named Khadijah, with whom he had several children. Life for Muhammad was stable, but inside he felt an emptiness. Something deeper was calling. Around the age of 40, Muhammad began retreating to a cave on Mount Hira just outside Mecca. There he would meditate, seeking solitude and reflection. In the year 610 CE, during one of these retreats, something happened that would change the course of history. According to Islamic tradition, the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and delivered a message from God. The angel commanded him, "Iqra," meaning read or recite. Muhammad, who was illiterate, was terrified. He fled the cave, shaken, believing perhaps he had gone mad or been possessed. Khadijah comforted him and believed in him. She became the first to embrace his message. Over time, more revelations came, and Muhammad began to share them with close friends and family. These messages proclaimed that there was only one God, Allah, and that Muhammad was his final messenger. The revelations emphasized justice, compassion, charity, and the importance of monotheism. Over the next 23 years, these revelations would be compiled into what is now known as the Quran, Islam's holiest book. But preaching this new faith in Mecca was dangerous. The Quraysh elites saw Muhammad's message as a threat to their social order, their wealth, and their religion. Islam rejected the idol worship that supported the pilgrimage economy. It spoke out against injustice and inequality. It undermined tribal loyalties in favor of a universal brotherhood of believers. As Muhammad gained more followers, the opposition grew fierce. His followers were mocked, beaten, boycotted, even killed. Some fled to Christian Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, seeking protection under its just king. Despite the hostility, Muhammad continued to preach. The revelations encouraged him. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. In the year 619, Muhammad suffered two great losses, his wife Khadijah and his uncle Abu Talib, his greatest sources of support. That year became known as the Year of Sorrow. With his protection gone, the threats against him escalated. In 621, a turning point came. Delegates from the city of Yathrib, later known as Medina, invited Muhammad to settle disputes between rival tribes and offered him protection. In 622, Muhammad and his followers secretly migrated to Medina in an event known as the Hijra, or migration. This event marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Muhammad became not just a religious leader, but a statesman and a military commander. In Medina, Muhammad built the first mosque and established a multi-religious constitution, the Constitution of Medina, that guaranteed rights and responsibilities to Muslims, Jews, and others who lived in the city. Islam began to take shape as a social, legal, and spiritual system. The Muslim community, or Ummah, began to grow in strength, but Meccan hostility did not end. Battles broke out between the Muslims of Medina and the Quraysh of Mecca. The Battle of Badr in 624 was a stunning Muslim victory against overwhelming odds, and it emboldened the believers. But the following year, at the Battle of Uhud, the Muslims suffered heavy losses, and in 627 the Quraysh laid siege to Medina in the Battle of the Trench. The Muslims dug defensive trenches and held firm, eventually causing the enemy to withdraw. By 630, the balance of power had shifted. Muhammad marched to Mecca with a large army, and the city surrendered without bloodshed. The idols around the Kaaba were destroyed, and Mecca was reclaimed as a center of monotheistic worship. Muhammad forgave his former enemies, winning many over through mercy rather than force. In 632, after performing his farewell pilgrimage and delivering his final sermon, Muhammad died in Medina at the age of 63. His death left the community in mourning, but the faith he had founded was already expanding. The question of who would succeed him, who would lead the Ummah, set the stage for one of the most defining divisions in Islamic history. That brings us to the era of the rightly guided caliphs, or the Rashidun Caliphate. These were the first four leaders of the Muslim community after Muhammad's death: Abu Bakr, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Uthman ibn Affan, and Ali ibn Abi Talib. Each faced unique challenges and contributed significantly to the spread of Islam. Abu Bakr, the Prophet's close companion and father-in-law, was chosen as the first caliph. He dealt with immediate internal threats: tribes who broke away or refused to pay zakat, the mandatory charity. These conflicts, known as the Ridda Wars or Apostasy Wars, were swiftly subdued. Abu Bakr also set in motion the compilation of the Quran into a single book form. He ruled for just over 2 years before his death. Umar ibn al-Khattab succeeded him. Under Umar's leadership, Islam expanded at a breathtaking pace. The armies of the Caliphate swept through the Byzantine and Sassanid empires, capturing Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Persia. Umar established administrative and legal systems to govern the rapidly growing territories. He introduced innovations like the Islamic calendar and public treasury. He was known for his simplicity, justice, and fear of God. He was assassinated in 644. Uthman ibn Affan became the third caliph. Under him, the conquests continued and trade flourished, but his reign was marred by internal dissent. Uthman oversaw the standardization of the Quran, commissioning a definitive version to prevent regional variations. However, accusations of nepotism and mismanagement began to rise. Discontent spread, and in 656, Uthman was assassinated in his home by rebels, a shocking act that deeply divided the Muslim world. Ali ibn Abi Talib, cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet, became the fourth caliph. His leadership was immediately challenged by those demanding justice for Uthman's death. This led to the first Muslim civil war, known as the Fitna. The Battle of the Camel saw Ali face off against Aisha, the Prophet's widow, and other companions. Later, at the Battle of Siffin, Ali fought against Muawiyah, the powerful governor of Syria. The battles ended inconclusively, and Ali's authority weakened. In 661, Ali was assassinated by a Kharijite, an extremist group that had broken away from his supporters. With Ali's death, the Rashidun era ended and the Umayyad dynasty rose. Muawiyah declared himself caliph and moved the capital to Damascus. This marked the beginning of a dynastic rule. The Umayyads expanded the empire westward into North Africa and Spain, and eastward into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. They ruled a vast territory that stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indus River. But not everyone accepted the Umayyads. Many believed that leadership of the Muslim community should stay within the Prophet's family, especially with Ali's descendants. This led to the emergence of a major split in Islam, Sunni and Shia. The Shia believed that Ali and his descendants, beginning with his son Hussein, were the rightful leaders, or imams. The Sunni, on the other hand, believed in the legitimacy of the caliphate based on consensus and capability, not bloodline. This divide deepened in 680 when Hussein ibn Ali, the grandson of the Prophet, was killed in the Battle of Karbala by Umayyad forces. Hussein's death became a central martyrdom in Shia Islam, commemorated every year on Ashura. The tragedy of Karbala remains one of the most emotionally charged and politically significant events in Islamic history. With the Umayyads entrenched in power, the Islamic world entered a new phase, one of empire, conquest, and cultural synthesis. As we continue exploring the sweeping saga of Islam's history, we move deeper into the age of dynasties and empires, where the faith that began in a desert cave now stood as a global power. Following the assassination of Ali and the controversial rise of Muawiyah, the Islamic world transitioned from the period of the rightly guided caliphs into a more monarchic and centralized rule under the Umayyad Caliphate. The Umayyads were based in Damascus, Syria, and ruled from 661 to 750 CE. They were a powerful clan within the Quraysh tribe and had long-standing political ambitions. Under Muawiyah and his successors, the caliphate adopted a more structured bureaucratic system, mimicking elements of the Byzantine and Persian administrations. Arabic was standardized as the official language of governance, and Islamic coinage replaced Byzantine and Sassanid currency. The Umayyad Caliphate oversaw one of the largest territorial expansions in human history. Within a few decades, Muslim armies had crossed North Africa, conquered the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain and Portugal, and even ventured into France, where they were halted at the Battle of Tours in 732 by Charles Martel. To the east, Muslim forces penetrated Central Asia and parts of the Indian subcontinent. The city of Cordoba in Spain became a beacon of Islamic art, science, and architecture. However, the rapid expansion came at a cost. The Umayyads were criticized for their preference toward Arab Muslims, often marginalizing non-Arab converts known as Mawali. Though these non-Arabs embraced Islam, they were treated as second-class citizens, facing tax burdens and social limitations. Additionally, the lavish lifestyles of Umayyad elites contrasted sharply with the more ascetic values associated with Muhammad and his companions. Discontent grew. Religious opposition also intensified. Many Muslims, particularly the Shia, rejected Umayyad rule entirely, viewing it as illegitimate and corrupt. Underground movements flourished, uniting various dissatisfied groups, Shia loyalists, non-Arab Muslims, and political dissidents. These tensions eventually culminated in a revolution. In 750 CE, the Umayyads were overthrown in a massive uprising led by the Abbasid family, descendants of Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, an uncle of Muhammad. The Abbasids garnered support from both Persian converts and Arab rebels. The final blow came at the Battle of the Zab, where the Umayyad Caliph Marwan Roman II was defeated and killed. The Abbasids then conducted a brutal purge of the Umayyad family. One survivor, Abd al-Rahman, escaped to Spain and established the independent Umayyad Emirate of Cordoba, which later became a caliphate in its own right. With the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate, the capital of the Islamic world shifted from Damascus to a newly built city, Baghdad, founded in 762 CE. Located in modern-day Iraq, Baghdad was strategically positioned along key trade routes and near the former Sassanid capital of Ctesiphon. It quickly became a global hub of knowledge, culture, and commerce. The Abbasid era is often considered the golden age of Islam, lasting from the 8th to the 13th centuries. It was a time of intellectual flourishing. Scholars, poets, scientists, and philosophers from diverse backgrounds gathered in Baghdad's famed House of Wisdom, where works from Greek, Persian, Indian, and other civilizations were translated into Arabic. Figures like Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, Ibn Sina Avicenna, a pioneer in medicine, Al-Farabi in philosophy, and Al-Biruni in astronomy shaped the future of science and knowledge in both the Muslim world and Europe. Islamic civilization during the Abbasid period absorbed and enhanced the legacies of previous empires. Advances were made in medicine, mathematics, optics, chemistry, engineering, architecture, and literature. The Arabic language became the medium for scholarship across the known world. Paper brought from China revolutionized learning and record-keeping. Libraries and schools were established across the caliphate. Culturally, the Abbasid Empire was cosmopolitan. Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, and Nishapur became centers of art, music, philosophy, and cuisine. Muslims, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, and others lived in relative coexistence under the dhimmi system, which offered protection to non-Muslims in exchange for a tax called the jizya. Social mobility was more fluid, and many non-Arabs rose to prominent positions, but no empire lasts unchallenged. By the 9th century, cracks began to appear in Abbasid authority. Regional governors, known as emirs, grew increasingly autonomous. In some cases, they stopped sending taxes to Baghdad and began establishing their own dynasties. One of the earliest examples was the Aghlabid dynasty in North Africa, which later launched the conquest of Sicily. In Persia, the Samanids and Buyids rose, establishing courts that rivaled Baghdad's. Sectarian divides also deepened. The Shia community, never reconciled to Abbasid rule, continued to resist. Various Shia sects emerged, each with its own interpretation of leadership and doctrine. The most radical was the Ismaili sect, which gave rise to the Fatimid Caliphate in North Africa. Claiming descent from Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, the Fatimids established their own caliphate in Egypt in 969 and founded Cairo as their capital. For a time, the Muslim world had three rival caliphs: Abbasid in Baghdad, Fatimid in Cairo, and Umayyad in Cordoba. In the eastern part of the empire, Turkic soldiers, known as Ghilman or Mamluks, were recruited as military slaves. Over time, these soldiers gained significant power. The most notable were the Seljuk Turks, who converted to Islam and declared themselves protectors of the Abbasid Caliph. In 1055, the Seljuks entered Baghdad and took control of the political apparatus, although they left the Caliph as a symbolic figurehead. Meanwhile, a new threat was rising from the west, the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban Roman II called for a Christian holy war to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control. Thousands of knights, peasants, and adventurers answered the call, launching the First Crusade. In 1099, they captured Jerusalem and massacred its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. This event shocked the Islamic world and led to decades of warfare between Crusader states and Muslim powers. Resistance to the Crusaders eventually coalesced under powerful Muslim leaders. One of the most famous was Salah al-Din al-Ayyubi, known in the West as Saladin. A Kurdish general who rose to prominence in Egypt, Saladin united much of Syria and Egypt and launched a successful campaign to retake Jerusalem in 1187. His victory at the Battle of Hattin and his chivalrous treatment of enemies earned him respect in both the Islamic and Christian worlds. While the Crusades raged in the Levant, new political powers were rising elsewhere. The Mongol Empire, forged by Genghis Khan, swept across Asia in the 13th century with devastating speed and brutality. In 1258, under the leadership of Hulagu Khan, the Mongols sacked Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate in its historical form. The city, once the jewel of the Islamic world, was burned, its libraries destroyed, and its population massacred. The Caliph was executed, a symbol of the world order collapsing. Though the Abbasids would survive symbolically in Cairo under Mamluk protection, real political power had shifted. The Mongol destruction of Baghdad marked a psychological rupture in the Muslim world, but it was not the end. Ironically, many Mongols themselves would later convert to Islam, particularly in regions like Persia and Central Asia. The Ilkhanate, one of the Mongol successor states, embraced Islam and sponsored scholarship and art. The religion, resilient and adaptive, continued to flourish under new empires. The Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals emerged as the next great Islamic powers, each ruling over vast territories with their own distinct interpretations of Islam. The Ottoman Empire, based in Anatolia, would conquer Constantinople in 1453 under Mehmed the Conqueror, transforming it into Istanbul and marking the end of the Byzantine Empire. The Ottomans adopted the title of Caliph, positioning themselves as the leaders of the Sunni Muslim world. The Safavid Empire in Persia, under Shah Ismail in the 16th century, imposed Twelver Shi'ism as the state religion, reshaping Iran's religious identity permanently. This created a lasting sectarian divide between Sunni Ottoman and Shia Safavid empires. Farther east, the Mughal Empire in India blended Persian culture, Islamic governance, and Indian traditions, producing architectural wonders like the Taj Mahal and fostering a dynamic, multicultural court. While these empires dominated the Muslim world politically, Islam as a religion continued to spread beyond them. Through trade, Sufi missionaries, and migration, Islam reached sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and even China. In places like Indonesia, it was Sufi mystics, not soldiers, who brought Islam through peaceful means. Islamic law, literature, art, and spirituality continued to evolve in different cultural contexts. By the 17th century, Islam was no longer confined to Arab lands or the classical empires of old. It had become a truly global faith, diverse in its expressions but united in its core beliefs. Belief in one God, in the prophethood of Muhammad, in the Quran, and in the Day of Judgment. But new challenges loomed: European colonialism, internal stagnation, and the modern world. As the world entered the early modern period, the Islamic world stood at a crossroads. The great empires of Islam, the Ottomans in the west, the Safavids in the center, and the Mughals in the east, were dominant political and cultural forces. But beneath their grandeur, the currents of change, decay, and disruption were beginning to stir. The next few centuries would test the resilience of Islamic civilization in the face of external invasion, internal division, and global transformation. We begin with the Ottoman Empire, arguably the most powerful Islamic empire of the early modern period. The Ottomans were Sunni Muslims of Turkic origin, who began their rise in the late 13th century in Anatolia, on the frontier of the decaying Byzantine Empire. In 1453, under Sultan Mehmed II, also known as Mehmed the Conqueror, the Ottomans captured Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The city was renamed Istanbul, and it became the political and cultural center of the empire. The conquest of Constantinople was more than a military achievement. It was a turning point in Islamic history. The Ottomans positioned themselves as the successors to both the Roman and Islamic legacies. They renovated the city, converting the famed Hagia Sophia into a mosque and promoting Islamic institutions, schools, and courts. In time, the Ottoman Sultan also took the title of Caliph, claiming spiritual leadership over all Muslims. The Ottoman state was a sophisticated bureaucracy. It operated under Sharia law, but also used canon, or imperial decrees, to govern matters not directly addressed in religious texts. A system known as the millet system allowed various religious communities, Christians, Jews, and others, to govern themselves in personal matters like marriage and inheritance. This pragmatic pluralism enabled the Ottomans to manage a vast and diverse empire stretching from Hungary to Arabia, from Algeria to Iraq. Ottoman power reached its zenith under Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century. Under Suleiman, the empire expanded deeper into Europe and North Africa. The legal system was refined, architecture flourished, and Islamic scholarship thrived. Mosques designed by Mimar Sinan, including the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, remain architectural marvels. Meanwhile, the Safavid Empire emerged in Persia. Founded in 1501 by Shah Ismail, the Safavids were a Shia dynasty that established Twelver Shi'ism as the state religion. This marked a profound shift. Iran, which had been predominantly Sunni for centuries, now embraced Shia Islam. The Safavid state rigorously promoted Shia doctrines, persecuted Sunnis, and established Shia religious institutions. The religious divide between the Safavids and the Sunni Ottomans sparked a series of wars and intensified the sectarian fault line that continues into the modern era. In the Indian subcontinent, the Mughal Empire rose as a dominant Muslim power. Founded by Babur, a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, the Mughals fused Persian, Indian, and Islamic traditions. Akbar the Great, the third Mughal emperor, pursued a policy of religious tolerance and established an inclusive administration. He invited Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and Jain scholars to debate theology and philosophy in his court. He even experimented with a syncretic religion, Din-i-Ilahi, though it did not survive his death. Under Akbar and his successors, the Mughal Empire reached new heights. Cities like Delhi, Agra, and Lahore became centers of art, literature, and architecture. The Mughal patronage produced lasting monuments, the most iconic of which is the Taj Mahal, commissioned by Shah Jahan as a mausoleum for his wife Mumtaz Mahal. Mughal rule was marked by relative stability, economic prosperity, and cultural brilliance. However, all three empires eventually faced decline. The reasons varied: internal rebellion, rigid bureaucracy, dynastic infighting, and overextension. But one factor increasingly affected them all: the rising power of Europe. From the 15th century onward, European nations began expanding their reach through exploration, trade, and colonization. The Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, and British began dominating sea routes that once belonged to Muslim merchants. The fall of Muslim Spain in 1492 and the subsequent persecution of Muslims and Jews marked the end of the last Islamic stronghold in Western Europe. In the Indian Ocean, European powers disrupted traditional Muslim trade networks. The Portuguese established bases along the African and Indian coasts. The Dutch seized key Muslim trading ports in Southeast Asia. European arms, ships, and navigational technology increasingly outmatched local powers. While Muslim empires remained land-based, European colonialism thrived on maritime supremacy. As the West gained economic and military power, Islamic societies struggled to adapt. Many scholars and leaders attributed their losses to a moral or spiritual decline, arguing that Muslims had strayed from Islam's true path. Others called for modernization and reform, often borrowing ideas from Europe. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the tide turned dramatically. One by one, Muslim regions fell under European control. The Mughals were reduced to figureheads as the British East India Company took over India. After the 1857 rebellion, called the First War of Independence by Indians and the Sepoy Mutiny by the British Crown formally assumed control, ending centuries of Muslim dominance in the subcontinent. In North Africa and the Middle East, France, Britain, and Italy carved out colonies and protectorates. Egypt became a British protectorate. Algeria was colonized by France. Libya was taken by Italy. The once mighty Ottoman Empire, known as the sick man of Europe, steadily lost territory. Rebellions, nationalist movements, and European interference weakened its hold. A crucial moment came during World War I. The Ottomans, having allied with Germany, found themselves on the losing side. After the war, the victorious Allied powers dismantled the Ottoman Empire. The 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France divided up much of the Middle East into spheres of influence. In 1924, the newly formed Republic of Turkey, under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, abolished the caliphate altogether. For the first time in over 1,200 years, there was no recognized caliph in the Muslim world. This loss triggered intense soul-searching among Muslims worldwide. The question loomed: what does it mean to be a Muslim in the modern world without a caliphate? In the 20th century, various responses emerged. Some advocated secular nationalism, as seen in Ataturk's Turkey and Nasser's Egypt. Others sought to revive Islamic governance through political Islam. The Muslim Brotherhood, founded in Egypt in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, promoted Islam as a comprehensive system encompassing politics, economics, and society. Elsewhere, Islamic movements took different forms. In Iran, a Shia revolution in 1979 overthrew the Western-backed Shah and established an Islamic republic under Ayatollah Khomeini, blending Shia theology with state power. The revolution inspired Islamists across the Sunni-Shia divide and alarmed Western powers and secular governments alike. In Saudi Arabia, founded in 1932 by Ibn Saud, the monarchy formed a deep alliance with the conservative Wahhabi movement, which emphasized strict adherence to a puritanical interpretation of Islam. With the discovery of oil, Saudi Arabia became extraordinarily wealthy and used its resources to fund Islamic institutions and religious missions globally, promoting its version of Islam. Throughout the 20th century, Islam's role in politics remained a central debate. The creation of Pakistan in 1947 as a homeland for Muslims after the partition of India was an experiment in Muslim nationalism. The rise of pan-Islamic movements called for unity among Muslims beyond national borders, sometimes through peaceful preaching, sometimes through militancy. But Islam was not merely reacting to politics. It continued to shape daily life, education, art, and ethics across the Muslim world. In countries from Indonesia to Morocco, Muslims lived diverse lives, some embracing modernity, others resisting it, many blending tradition and innovation. Islam proved remarkably adaptable, accommodating varied cultures, languages, and societies while preserving its spiritual core. The late 20th and early 21st centuries brought new challenges and controversies. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 triggered a global jihadist response. Fighters from across the Muslim world joined the Afghan Mujahideen, supported by the United States, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. Among these fighters was Osama bin Laden, who would later turn against the West, founding al-Qaeda and launching the 9/11 attacks in 2001. The U.S. response included invasions of Afghanistan and later Iraq, which destabilized entire regions and ignited sectarian wars. The emergence of groups like ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, shocked the world with its brutality and its attempt to resurrect a caliphate by force. While claiming religious legitimacy, ISIS was widely condemned by mainstream Muslim scholars and communities. Today, Islam is a global religion with over 1.9 billion followers. It is the second largest religion in the world and the fastest growing. Muslims live on every continent, speak hundreds of languages, and belong to diverse ethnicities and schools of thought. From the crowded streets of Cairo to the skyscrapers of Kuala Lumpur, from the mosques of Istanbul to the neighborhoods of London and New York, Islam continues to evolve in dialogue with the modern world. It is a religion of prayer, charity, and pilgrimage. It is also a civilization shaped by prophets and poets, scholars and warriors, saints and revolutionaries. Its history is marked by moments of triumph and tragedy, unity and division, peace and conflict. And through it all, the core testimony remains the same. La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammadur Rasul Allah, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. As we continue our journey through the history of the Islamic religion, we now move further into the complexities of the 21st century, a period in which Islam continues to play a vital role on the global stage. This era is marked by rapid globalization, intensified debates over identity and reform, rising Islamophobia, technological transformation, and the shifting balance between secularism and religious revivalism in Muslim societies. At the turn of the 21st century, the Muslim world was facing the combined legacy of colonialism, authoritarianism, underdevelopment, and foreign intervention. Many nations in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia had gained formal independence in the mid-20th century, but real sovereignty was often elusive. Secular regimes had taken power in many post-colonial states, but these governments frequently failed to deliver political freedom or economic prosperity. Corruption, repression, and inequality led to widespread frustration, especially among youth populations. One of the most transformative and traumatic events in the modern history of Islam was the September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States. 19 men, most of them from Saudi Arabia, hijacked 4 planes and carried out suicide missions against symbols of American power, destroying the World Trade Center towers in New York and damaging the Pentagon in Washington. Nearly 3,000 people were killed. The attack was claimed by Al-Qaeda, an extremist jihadist organization led by Osama bin Laden. The 9/11 attacks had a profound impact, not just on international relations, but also on how Islam was perceived around the world. In the West, fear and misunderstanding of Islam grew rapidly. Islamophobia, already present in some form, escalated significantly. Muslims living in non-Muslim majority countries, especially in the US and Europe, faced increased scrutiny, discrimination, and surveillance. In response, the United States launched the War on Terror, invading Afghanistan in October 2001 to oust the Taliban regime, which had provided sanctuary to Al-Qaeda. 2 years later, the US invaded Iraq, citing weapons of mass destruction and alleged ties between Saddam Hussein's regime and terrorism. The Iraq War, however, unleashed chaos. Sectarian violence between Sunni and Shia groups exploded, and Al-Qaeda in Iraq eventually evolved into a new, more brutal organization, ISIS. The rise of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria ISIS, also known as Daesh, marked one of the darkest chapters in modern Islamic history. In 2014, under the leadership of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, ISIS declared a new caliphate, with its capital in Raqqa, Syria. The group exploited the power vacuums in Syria's civil war and post-invasion Iraq, seizing large swaths of territory. They imposed a harsh version of Islamic law, executed prisoners, persecuted minorities, and released gruesome propaganda videos that shocked the world. ISIS's claims of religious legitimacy were widely rejected by the global Muslim community. Leading Muslim scholars and institutions, including Egypt's Al-Azhar, issued statements refuting ISIS's theology and tactics. The group's use of Islamic terminology and symbols was seen as a distortion designed to justify violence and gain followers. Military coalitions eventually forced ISIS out of its territory by 2019, but its legacy, ideology, and affiliated groups persist in various parts of the world. The instability of the 2000s set the stage for a wave of uprisings known as the Arab Spring, which began in Tunisia in late 2010. Sparked by the self-immolation of a street vendor protesting government corruption and police abuse, mass protests erupted across the Arab world. People demanded dignity, justice, freedom, and an end to authoritarian rule. Governments fell in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya and Yemen, while civil wars broke out in Syria and Libya. In Egypt, the democratic election of Mohammed Morsi, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, marked the first time a non-military Islamist came to power in modern Egyptian history. However, Morsi's tenure was short-lived. In 2013, he was ousted in a military coup led by Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who established a new regime with a firm secular and authoritarian orientation. The Muslim Brotherhood was outlawed, and thousands of its members were arrested or killed. The events in Egypt reflected a broader tension in the Muslim world between Islamist movements, which seek to bring Islamic principles into governance, and secular elites who view political Islam as a threat to national identity and stability. Across the Islamic world, this tension plays out differently. In Turkey, the ruling Justice and Development Party AKP, under Recep Tayyip Erdogan, blended Islamic conservatism with electoral democracy. Erdogan gradually centralized power, shifting from a parliamentary to a presidential system and facing accusations of authoritarianism. Yet under his rule, Turkey also positioned itself as a voice for Sunni Muslims globally, especially in contrast to traditional centers like Saudi Arabia or Egypt. In Iran, the Islamic Republic has remained firmly in place since the 1979 revolution. The country's Shia clerical leadership continues to guide politics through the supreme leader, currently Ali Khamenei, while navigating internal pressures for reform and external sanctions. Iran has also played a major regional role, supporting proxy groups in Iraq, Lebanon Hezbollah, Yemen Houthis, and Syria, all under the banner of resistance to Western and Israeli influence. This has led to a prolonged Sunni Shia Cold War in the Middle East, with Saudi Arabia and Iran as rival poles. While both claim to be defenders of Islam, their visions are very different. Saudi Arabia promotes Wahhabi orthodoxy and alliance with Western powers, while Iran champions revolutionary Shiism and opposition to Israel and US influence. Their rivalry has fueled wars and unrest across the region. Meanwhile, Islam has continued to expand in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. In Nigeria, the rise of Boko Haram, a militant group seeking to establish an Islamic state, has led to violence, kidnappings, and mass displacement. In the Sahel, groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS have taken root in areas where weak governance and poverty prevail. Governments, often with Western support, struggle to maintain control. In Southeast Asia, countries like Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim-majority country, have embraced a moderate form of Islam. Indonesian Islam, shaped by centuries of trade, mysticism, and local traditions, generally promotes pluralism and democracy. However, rising conservatism and occasional violence against minorities show that the region is not immune to global trends. In Western countries, Muslims face another set of challenges. Immigration, refugee crises, and demographic changes have increased Muslim populations in Europe and North America. While many Muslims thrive in their new societies, building communities, mosques, and businesses, they also encounter suspicion, prejudice, and marginalization. Headscarf bans, anti-mosque protests, surveillance programs, and far-right populism contribute to a sense of alienation. At the same time, a new generation of Muslim intellectuals, activists, and thinkers are redefining Islam in Western contexts. They tackle issues of identity, gender, race, and spirituality. They engage in interfaith dialogue, contribute to social justice movements, and debate the meaning of Islam in pluralistic, secular societies. Figures like Hamza Yusuf, Ingrid Mattson, Omar Suleiman, and Amina Wadud represent diverse approaches to Islamic thought in the modern age. Technology, too, has transformed Islamic practice and discourse. The Quran, Hadith collections, fatwas, and sermons are all accessible online. Digital dawah, preaching, has exploded on YouTube and social media. Smartphones guide prayer times and Qibla direction. Apps offer Quran memorization tools, halal restaurant finders, and virtual pilgrimage guides. But this digital age also allows misinformation, radicalization, and sectarian propaganda to spread with ease. One of the most significant debates within Islam today is the issue of reform. What does it mean to be faithful to tradition while addressing the needs of the present? Can Islamic law evolve? Should it be codified into state law or remain a matter of personal morality and communal ethics? Should women lead prayer? Should Muslims embrace democracy, liberalism, or seek alternatives? These are not new questions. Islamic history is full of debates, schools of thought, and interpretations. The early jurists, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, disagreed on key issues. The great theologians like Al-Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah, philosophers like Averroes ibn Rushd, and mystics like Rumi all offered different visions of Islam. Today, the tradition continues, but under very different conditions. Amid these debates, many Muslims find solace and strength in the core practices: prayer salat, charity zakat, fasting in Ramadan Sawm, pilgrimage Hajj, and testifying to the oneness of God and the prophethood of Muhammad Shahada. These acts, carried out by millions daily, connect believers across continents and centuries. Despite the turbulence of recent history, Islam's message continues to resonate. It speaks of surrender to God, of compassion, justice, and purpose. It invites believers to seek knowledge, uphold mercy, care for the orphan and the poor, and walk with humility. This brings us to the edge of the present. Islam, once born in the sands of Arabia, now moves through the digital clouds, the refugee camps, the crowded cities, and the silent prayer rooms of the world. It is a religion in motion, tested, reinterpreted, challenged, and reaffirmed every day. But the story does not end here. There are still centuries of memory to uncover, and countless lives shaped by this vast, living tradition. As the 21st century unfolds, the presence of Islam across global civilizations continues to deepen, diversify, and develop under conditions more complex than ever before. The core beliefs of the religion, faith in one God Allah, belief in the prophethood of Muhammad, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage, remain the central pillars that unite nearly 2 billion Muslims. But how those beliefs are lived, expressed, and integrated into daily life now varies more widely than at any other point in Islamic history. Let us explore further how Islam, in the current age, manifests through national, regional, and cultural contexts, and how key issues such as gender, governance, globalization, secularism, and tradition interact with the Islamic worldview. In the Middle East, the traditional heartland of Islam, political instability remains a defining feature. Following the aftermath of the Arab Spring uprisings, many countries either fell into civil war or experienced an intensification of authoritarianism. In Syria, a multi-faction civil war involving government forces, Islamist groups, Kurdish militias, foreign powers, and rebel factions has devastated the country. Sectarian identity played a large role in this conflict, with the Alawite Shia-linked regime of Bashar al-Assad supported by Iran, while many Sunni opposition groups received backing from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and other Sunni-majority countries. The resulting power vacuum allowed ISIS to establish its short-lived caliphate, and while the group has lost most of its territory, its ideological remnants continue to inspire lone wolf attacks and affiliate groups in places like Libya, Nigeria, and Afghanistan. The Syrian war and the broader chaos in the Middle East has caused millions of refugees to flee to neighboring countries and into Europe, triggering both humanitarian efforts and waves of anti-immigration sentiment in the West. In Saudi Arabia, a dramatic transformation is underway under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. Through his Vision 2030 plan, MBS has sought to reduce the kingdom's dependence on oil, open the country to tourism, and loosen certain cultural restrictions. Women can now drive, attend sports events, and travel without a male guardian's permission, reforms unthinkable just a decade ago. However, these liberalizations exist alongside a heavy-handed crackdown on dissent, including the arrest of scholars, activists, and critics. Saudi Arabia continues to claim custodianship of Islam's holiest cities, Mecca and Medina, making its political and religious decisions influential far beyond its borders. In Iran, the Islamic Republic faces its own internal challenges. Economic sanctions, political repression, and social dissatisfaction, especially among the youth, have fueled periodic protests. The 2022 death of Mahsa Amini, a young woman who died after being arrested by the morality police for allegedly violating hijab rules, triggered nationwide unrest. Protesters, including many women, challenged the theocratic regime's control over public life. The state responded with force, but the protest movement revealed growing tensions between state-enforced religiosity and a population increasingly desiring freedom, transparency, and dignity. Meanwhile, Turkey has continued to balance Islam, nationalism, and modernity. President Erdogan and the AKP have gradually reversed many of the secular policies enforced during the early republic founded by Ataturk. Under Erdogan, Islamic expression has flourished in the public sphere. The Hagia Sophia was reconverted into a mosque in 2020, a symbolic act of reclaiming Ottoman Islamic heritage. Turkey portrays itself as a bridge between East and West, Islam and modernity, though its democratic institutions have eroded and press freedom has declined. In Africa, Islam has long-standing roots, especially in North Africa and the Sahel region. In countries like Egypt, Algeria, Sudan, and Tunisia, Islam plays a central role in public and private life. Tunisia remains the most successful example of post-Arab Spring democracy, with a relatively pluralistic political system, although tensions between secular and Islamist factions persist. In Egypt, President Sisi's military regime continues to suppress Islamist movements, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood, under the guise of combating terrorism. Further south, countries like Nigeria, Mali, and Burkina Faso face increasing threats from extremist groups such as Boko Haram and regional affiliates of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. These groups exploit poverty, weak governance, and ethnic divides to establish footholds. At the same time, African Islam is also deeply shaped by Sufism, a mystical tradition emphasizing spiritual purification, love of God, and reverence for saints. Sufi orders have historically promoted education, peace, and communal unity across vast regions of West and East Africa. In South Asia, Islam is practiced by hundreds of millions, making it the largest regional concentration of Muslims in the world. Pakistan, founded as a homeland for Muslims in 1947, continues to grapple with what Islamic governance should look like. Its laws reflect Islamic principles, and the state supports Islamic education, but the country also faces deep internal divisions, sectarian violence, and political instability. Extremist groups still operate within its borders, and debates over blasphemy laws, women's rights, and religious minorities often provoke both national and international controversy. In India, home to over 200 million Muslims, the relationship between the Muslim community and the majority Hindu population has become increasingly strained under the rule of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Bharatiya Janata Party (BJP). Rising Hindu nationalism has led to riots, lynchings, mosque demolitions, and discriminatory laws, including the Citizenship Amendment Act (CAR), which many see as anti-Muslim. Despite this, Indian Muslims remain active in politics, culture, and civil society. Bangladesh, once East Pakistan, has maintained a secular constitution but remains religiously devout. The country has cracked down on extremist groups while promoting Islamic education and charity. Sri Lanka and Myanmar, though Buddhist majority, have significant Muslim minorities, including the Rohingya in Myanmar. a population subjected to ethnic cleansing and mass displacement. The persecution of the Rohingya has become one of the most urgent humanitarian crises involving Muslims in the 21st century. In Southeast Asia, Islam thrives in culturally rich and diverse environments. Indonesia, with over 230 million Muslims, remains the largest Muslim-majority country. Its democratic system has enabled Islamic parties and movements to participate in governance while maintaining religious pluralism. Indonesian Islam is deeply influenced by local traditions, Sufism, and a culture of tolerance, though recent years have seen a rise in conservatism, blasphemy accusations, and social media-driven religious activism. In Malaysia, Islam is the official religion, and the state supports a particular interpretation of Sunni Islam. Sharia courts exist alongside civil courts, and issues like apostasy, interfaith marriage, and Islamic law enforcement are politically sensitive. The country has attempted to balance modernization, economic development, and Islamic identity, though with increasing challenges from both liberal and conservative factions. In Western countries, the Muslim experience is shaped by migration, identity politics, and pluralism. In Europe, especially in countries like France, Germany, and the UK, large Muslim communities from former colonies form vibrant parts of urban life. These communities are engaged in all fields, from politics to academia, sports to music, but also face persistent challenges. France's laïcité secularism laws have led to bans on hijab in schools and niqab in public spaces, sparking fierce debate over religious freedom and national identity. Muslim women in the West, in particular, have become the center of broader societal debates. The veil, whether hijab, niqab, or burqa, has been politicized, alternately seen as a symbol of piety, oppression, or resistance, depending on context and perspective. Yet for many Muslim women, wearing the veil is a deeply personal act of devotion, culture, or choice, one that reflects autonomy rather than submission. In the United States, Muslims form a small but highly diverse population, including African Americans, Arabs, South Asians, and converts. Post-9/11 surveillance, travel bans, hate crimes, and media portrayals have tested the community's resilience. Yet American Muslims have also made significant strides, electing representatives like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, organizing community responses to social injustice, and building interfaith alliances. American mosques have evolved into dynamic centers for education, charity, and civic activism. Around the world, Islam continues to influence the fields of science, literature, art, and environmentalism. Islamic finance, which forbids interest and promotes risk-sharing, is a growing field with global reach. Islamic architecture continues to evolve, with new mosques designed to reflect both tradition and modern aesthetics. In art, calligraphy, poetry, and nasheed Islamic music remain popular, often blending classical themes with contemporary expression. Meanwhile, Islamic theology and philosophy continue to be areas of deep thought and revival. Questions of Ijtihad independent reasoning, Maqasid al-Sharia objectives of Islamic law, and ethics in bioengineering, technology, and artificial intelligence are all actively explored by modern scholars. Institutions like Al-Azhar, Qarawiyyin, Deoband, Com, and Western Islamic colleges remain critical centers for interpreting and transmitting Islamic knowledge. Today, Islam exists in a post-globalized, post-colonial, post-industrial world, a world driven by media, mobility, and multiplicity. It coexists with ideologies, cultures, and belief systems that were unknown during the early centuries of revelation. The core spiritual message remains, but how it is lived is constantly evolving. This tension between timeless principles and modern circumstances is what gives Islam and its history enduring vitality. Every generation revisits the past, interprets the Quran and the Hadith, struggles with the application of law and ethics, and debates how to remain true to the message while navigating the present. And as we look to the future, Islam will continue to grow. Demographic trends suggest that by 2050, Muslims will nearly equal Christians as the largest religious group on earth. In countries like India, Nigeria, and Indonesia, the Muslim population is expected to rise significantly. The digital age will likely continue to democratize religious authority, challenging traditional institutions, but also empowering individuals to study, interpret, and live Islam in deeply personal ways. As we delve deeper into the continuing narrative of Islam's history, we enter a phase of reflection, where history, theology, politics, and society are not merely linear progressions, but converging forces shaping the identity of a global faith in the modern era. The story of Islam now becomes one of internal plurality, globalized identity, and a struggle for balance between preservation and innovation. The question that dominates much of contemporary discourse is, what does it mean to be a Muslim today? There is no single answer to this, because Islam in the 21st century is practiced in almost every corner of the globe, in hundreds of cultures, in dozens of languages, and across a broad ideological spectrum, from deeply conservative communities to liberal reformist circles. Yet all are rooted in the foundational belief in one God, Allah, and in Muhammad as his final messenger. Let us first examine how religious scholarship and authority have evolved. In the classical era, religious authority in Islam was largely located in the ulama, a class of scholars trained in Islamic jurisprudence, theology, grammar, and hadith. They were responsible for issuing fatwas, interpreting the Sharia, teaching the Quran and Sunnah, and guiding public morality. Institutions such as Al-Azhar University in Egypt, founded in the 10th century, or the Qarawiyyin Mosque University in Morocco, functioned as centers of Islamic learning. In the modern era, however, the influence of traditional ulama has shifted. Colonial powers disrupted Islamic legal systems, replacing them with secular courts. Post-colonial governments often co-opted or restricted religious institutions. In many Muslim-majority countries, official religious authorities are state-appointed, leading to criticism that they serve power more than truth. At the same time, the democratization of knowledge via the internet has made Islamic texts, sermons, and opinions available to anyone with a phone. This has led to an explosion of new religious voices, self-taught preachers, influencers, YouTube imams, and digital muftis, who often bypass traditional scholarly structures. Some offer insightful commentary, others spread simplistic, divisive, or extremist messages. This decentralization has created a paradox: more access to Islamic knowledge, but less consensus on what is authoritative. Debates over the nature of Sharia law, its scope, function, and flexibility are at the center of much of this discourse. In the early centuries, Sharia developed as a living tradition, interpreted through the four Sunni madhabs legal schools, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali, and several Shia schools, such as the Jafari. These schools offered structured but diverse approaches to law, allowing for adaptation based on time and place. In the modern age, however, Sharia is often portrayed in extremes, either as a rigid, unchanging system incompatible with modernity, or as a repressive political tool used by authoritarian regimes. In reality, Sharia encompasses everything from ritual worship to ethics, business contracts to marriage laws, and includes both divine commands and human interpretations. Efforts to revive Sharia in the modern era vary greatly. In countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran, Sharia has been enshrined in state law, though in sharply different ways. Saudi Arabia bases its system on the Hanbali Wahhabi interpretation, while Iran follows a Shia Jafari framework under the principle of Wilayat al-Faqih guardianship of the jurist. In other countries, Sharia may only apply to personal status laws, marriage, divorce, inheritance, or exist alongside secular law. Some modern reformists advocate a return to the Maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of Islamic law: protection of life, religion, intellect, lineage, and property. They argue that Islamic law must be interpreted in a way that serves these core objectives and reflects the context of the modern world, including human rights, gender equity, and pluralism. Others see this as a dilution of divine authority. Another ongoing theme in contemporary Islamic history is the question of gender and women's rights. While early Islam introduced revolutionary reforms for women in 7th century Arabia, granting them rights to inheritance, divorce, and education, many traditional interpretations became influenced by patriarchal norms over centuries. In today's world, Muslim women are actively engaging with Islamic texts, reinterpreting them through scholarly, feminist, and spiritual lenses. Figures such as Amina Wadad, Lael Bakshire, and Fatima Mernissi have led the way in asserting that Islam, properly understood, supports gender justice. Wadad, a scholar of Quranic studies, became the first woman to lead a mixed-gender congregational prayer in 2005, sparking fierce debate. Across the Muslim world, women now serve as scholars, teachers, judges, and political leaders, even as debates over hijab, modesty, marriage rights, and gender roles continue. Sufism, the mystical dimension of Islam, continues to be a major influence, especially in Africa, Central Asia, South Asia, and parts of the Middle East. Sufism emphasizes spiritual purification, remembrance of God, dhikr, love of the Prophet, and submission to a spiritual guide, murshid or sheikh. Sufi orders like the Naqshbandi, Qadiri, Kishti, and Tijaniya maintain strong followings. While Sufism has historically coexisted with orthodoxy, it has also faced opposition, especially from Salafi and Wahhabi movements, which view Sufi practices such as shrine visitation, music, and veneration of saints as innovations, bid'ah, or even shirk, associating partners with God. This tension has sometimes erupted into violence. In Pakistan, Egypt, and Mali, Sufi shrines have been attacked by extremists. Despite this, many Muslims find in Sufism a deep source of spiritual connection, emotional healing, and communal identity. The poetry of Jalal al-Din Rumi, a 13th century Sufi master, remains widely read and loved across cultures. Rumi's message of divine love, unity, and the inner journey transcends sectarian lines. Interfaith dialogue has also become an important dimension of Islam's modern presence. Across the globe, Muslims engage with Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and secular thinkers in efforts to build mutual understanding and combat prejudice. Events such as the Marrakesh Declaration 2016, which affirmed the rights of religious minorities in Muslim-majority countries, and the document on human fraternity signed in 2019 between Pope Francis and Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb of Al-Azhar, reflect a growing emphasis on coexistence. At the same time, Islamophobia remains a serious issue. Negative portrayals of Islam in media, association of terrorism with the religion, and political rhetoric targeting Muslims have fueled discrimination. In countries like China, Myanmar, and India, Muslims face systemic persecution, surveillance, and denial of rights. The plight of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, subjected to mass detention, forced labor, and religious erasure, has drawn international condemnation, yet global response remains muted. Meanwhile, in Europe, anti-Muslim sentiments have become central to far-right political platforms. Parties in France, Austria, Hungary, and others campaign on anti-Islamic messages, often framing Muslim communities as threats to national identity. Headscarf bans, mosque restrictions, and anti-immigration policies contribute to a climate of fear. However, Muslim communities in these countries are increasingly organized, assertive, and engaged in civic life. Amid these complex realities, young Muslims worldwide are forging new identities, rooted in faith, but attuned to modern realities. Whether it's Muslim athletes, artists, software engineers, or poets, Islam is being expressed through new mediums. Halal fashion, Islamic finance, faith-based environmentalism, and digital dawah are examples of how Islam continues to adapt and remain relevant. Islamic education, too, is transforming. Traditional madrasas still exist, but now many are being reformed or augmented with contemporary curricula. In universities, Islamic studies has become a global academic discipline. Institutions in the West, such as Harvard, Oxford, and Georgetown, host centers for Islamic research and interfaith understanding, while new Muslim-founded institutions such as Zaytuna College in the US and Cambridge Muslim College in the UK strive to produce scholars fluent in both Islamic tradition and modern thought. In many ways, Islam in the 21st century resembles its earliest centuries, a religion not confined to a single ethnicity, language, or state, but one that is global, diverse, and dynamic. The conversations taking place today about justice, power, identity, and morality are echoes of those that happened in Medina, Damascus, Baghdad, and Cordoba. We are witnessing the continuation of a civilization that has endured for nearly 1.5 millennia. Through conquests and defeats, caliphates and colonizers, revolutions and reformations, Islam has not just survived, it has expanded, evolved, and been reborn in every generation. And its story continues. As we move further into the unfolding narrative of Islam's place in the world, it becomes clear that the religion's history is not simply a record of political empires or theological doctrines. It is the ongoing story of people. Billions of individuals over centuries have shaped and reshaped what Islam means in their lives, whether through scholarship, rebellion, poetry, prayer, or innovation. The religion's resilience lies in its capacity to function both as a personal faith and a civilizational force. By the early decades of the 21st century, Islam had already entered a new stage of its global journey. Having long been associated primarily with the Middle East, it is now thoroughly decentralized in both practice and influence. While Mecca and Medina remain the holiest cities and annual Hajj continues to be a spiritual cornerstone, the centers of Islamic thought, politics, and identity are increasingly spread across the world. From Jakarta to Lagos, from London to Toronto, from Istanbul to New Delhi. To better understand this moment in the history of Islam, it's helpful to examine some of the major contemporary themes that dominate the discourse across Muslim societies. 1. Global Muslim identity and Ummah consciousness. The concept of the Ummah, the global community of believers, is rooted in the Quranic vision of a transnational brotherhood united by faith. While this ideal has existed since the time of the Prophet, modern communication technologies have brought this sense of connectedness to an unprecedented level. Muslims in different countries now share sermons, lectures, and religious content instantly through platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. The Ramadan experience is now global, shared through live-streamed Taraweeh prayers, global charity campaigns, and synchronized fasting updates. The sense of belonging to a worldwide faith community has deepened, especially among youth. At the same time, the ideal of the Ummah often clashes with national loyalties, sectarian divides, and political interests. Calls for Muslim unity are frequently heard, but rarely realized. Regional powers, such as Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, Qatar, and Indonesia, each promote different models of leadership and religious interpretation, and often find themselves at odds diplomatically or ideologically. Efforts such as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, attempt to provide a collective voice for Muslims on the global stage, but the organization has limited political power and often lacks internal cohesion. 2. Islamic ethics and modern science. As technological advancement accelerates, Islamic scholars and communities are actively debating how to approach modern scientific challenges. Topics like artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, organ donation, end-of-life care, and cloning raise ethical questions that require both theological insight and scientific literacy. Islamic bioethics is now a growing field, with scholars working to interpret foundational Islamic principles, like the sanctity of life, divine will, and human responsibility, in the context of new technologies. In places like Malaysia, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, Islamic research institutions partner with medical centers and universities to address these questions. Islamic finance also continues to grow globally, with a focus on interest-free transactions, ethical investment, and risk-sharing. Islamic banks have expanded across the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and even into Western markets. Global Islamic finance assets have crossed $2 trillion USD, with institutions in countries like the UK and South Africa offering Sharia-compliant services to both Muslim and non-Muslim clients. 3. Islam and environmentalism. Another area of rising concern is the relationship between Islam and the environment. While environmental degradation is a global issue, many Muslim-majority countries are among the most affected by climate change, including Bangladesh, Pakistan, Somalia, and Sudan. Islamic environmentalism draws upon Quranic verses that emphasize the role of humans as Khalifa stewards of the earth and the balance mizan that must be maintained in nature. Prophetic teachings also include specific instructions on conservation, cleanliness, and kindness to animals. Recent initiatives, like the Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change 2015, call on Muslims to take climate action as a religious duty. In Indonesia, pesantren Islamic boarding schools now incorporate environmental awareness into their teachings. In the Arabian Gulf, solar energy is being framed not only as economic necessity, but as an ethical choice compatible with Islamic teachings. 4. The Islamic revival and the struggle with extremism since the 1970s. There has been a marked revival of Islamic practice across much of the Muslim world. This revival has taken many forms: renewed interest in the Quran and Hadith, the spread of Islamic education, growing mosque attendance, and the rise of faith-based political parties. In many cases, this revival has coexisted peacefully with modern institutions and civic life. However, it has also, in some contexts, opened space for more puritanical or radical interpretations, especially where economic despair, political repression, or foreign occupation exists. Groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Taliban, and others have hijacked the revivalist spirit and redirected it toward violent, exclusivist ideologies. These groups often portray themselves as heirs to early Islamic purity, but their actions have been widely condemned by mainstream scholars across all major madhabs and sects. One of the most important global initiatives to counter extremism is religious education reform. Countries such as Morocco have revised their Islamic curricula to emphasize tolerance, coexistence, and moderation. In Pakistan, efforts are ongoing to reform the madrasa system to include secular subjects and critical thinking skills, although progress is uneven and often politicized. 5. Islam in the digital world. The digital revolution has completely transformed how Muslims practice, learn, and even imagine their religion. Entire communities of believers now form online, where Islamic knowledge is shared in every language, and where debates about theology, gender, sectarianism, and reform play out in real time. The smartphone has become a spiritual tool. Muslims use apps to track prayer times, recite the Quran, calculate zakat, and find halal restaurants. Online platforms allow for digital fatwa services, virtual halakha study circles, and even online nikah ceremonies. At the same time, the internet has also created echo chambers, misinformation, and the spread of extremist propaganda. Social media algorithms often amplify divisive content, making it harder to maintain unity and civility within the global Muslim discourse. The metaverse, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence are now being explored as new frontiers for dawah, spiritual education, and even digital pilgrimage experiences. Some scholars have debated the validity of these practices, while others see them as a natural extension of Islam's adaptability. 6. Muslim minorities and religious freedom in non-Muslim majority societies. Muslim minorities face unique challenges and opportunities. In China, over 1 million Uyghur Muslims have been detained in re-education camps where reports of forced labor, family separation, and religious erasure have surfaced. Mosques have been demolished or repurposed, and public expressions of Islamic identity, beards, hijabs, fasting, have been criminalized. In India, growing Hindu nationalism has increased pressure on Muslim communities. Anti-Muslim riots, citizenship laws, lynchings, and political marginalization are increasingly common. Despite this, Indian Muslims remain deeply connected to the country's identity, culture, and history, continuing to contribute to every sector of society. In Europe and North America, Islam is one of the fastest-growing religions due to both immigration and conversion. Muslim communities in these regions are often diverse, dynamic, and deeply engaged in civic life. However, they also face surveillance, discrimination, and right-wing populism. Islamophobia is now a well-documented phenomenon. Attacks on mosques, bans on Islamic clothing, and political rhetoric painting Muslims as outsiders contribute to social isolation and alienation. In response, Muslims have increased interfaith outreach, political engagement, and internal community organization. Yet, many Muslims in the West also express deep attachment to their faith and enjoy freedom to practice it in ways that are restricted in other parts of the world. Converts to Islam, many from African American, Latino, and white backgrounds, continue to enrich the tradition with new insights and cultural expressions. This part of the story reveals the great paradox of our time. Islam is more global, visible, and diverse than ever before, but also more contested, misunderstood, and politicized. Whether through law, art, politics, scholarship, or everyday life, Muslims across the globe are navigating a world that is as connected as it is fractured, as open as it is surveilled, and as promising as it is perilous. They are asking old questions in new contexts. What does God require of us? What does justice mean today? How do we protect the sacred in an age of speed, spectacle, and noise? The future of Islam will depend not only on scholars and rulers, but on ordinary believers, mothers, students, workers, artists, teachers, who carry the faith forward with each prayer, each act of charity, each struggle for dignity, and each refusal to let fear overcome hope. The next chapters will take us even deeper into how Islam faces the future, through its youth, its intellectual revival, and its potential to contribute to a more ethical, spiritual, and compassionate global civilization. As the long narrative of Islam enters its most modern phase, we begin to see a complex interweaving of legacy and innovation, deep-rooted faith, and rapidly shifting realities. Islam, the religion born in 7th century Arabia, now lives vibrantly in the hearts, laws, cultures, and aspirations of people across every continent. Its history is no longer confined to Arab deserts, Persian courts, or Ottoman halls. It pulses in high-rise cities, refugee camps, tech startups, academic institutions, and artistic movements worldwide. This portion of the documentary will examine the forces now shaping Islam's role in the 21st century's unfolding future, with an eye toward intellectual revival, youth-led transformation, intercultural synthesis, and the ongoing negotiation between religion and modernity. 1. The intellectual revival. New thought for New Age Islamic intellectualism has always been a core feature of its civilizational identity. From the House of Wisdom in Baghdad to the madrasa networks of Andalusia and Central Asia, Muslims historically viewed knowledge, ilm, as sacred, whether religious or scientific. That intellectual tradition faded under the pressures of colonialism, stagnation, and internal orthodoxy. But in recent decades, there has been a conscious movement to revive it. Modern Muslim thinkers are engaging with a wide range of disciplines: philosophy, sociology, economics, gender studies, neuroscience, to interpret Islam in light of contemporary challenges. Key figures include Tariq Ramadan, whose work on European Islam explores how Muslims in the West can remain faithful while integrating into secular democracies; Amina Wadad, who offers feminist Quranic hermeneutics to challenge patriarchal readings of sacred texts; Hamza Yusuf, who emphasizes classical scholarship and spiritual refinement within Western academic and civic contexts; Abdullahi an-Naim, who advocates for an Islamic foundation of human rights and secular governance; Mustafa Akayol, who writes on Islamic liberalism, freedom of conscience, and reform rooted in tradition. This revival is not simply about reinterpretation, it's about recovering the dynamism and complexity of early Islamic thought. There is renewed interest in ijtihad, the independent reasoning process historically used by scholars to derive rulings for new situations. After centuries of claiming that the gates of ijtihad are closed, many modern scholars argue that reopening them is essential for Islam to respond effectively to today's issues: climate change, digital ethics, bioengineering, globalization, and pluralism. The Quran's message is eternal, but its application must be continually reassessed to ensure that its justice, mercy, and wisdom are properly manifested in every age. 2. Youth and the new face of the Ummah. Demographically, the Muslim world is young. In countries like Egypt, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Indonesia, over half the population is under 30. These young Muslims are growing up in an environment entirely different from their parents: more connected, more educated, more critical, and more uncertain. Access to information via smartphones and the internet has broken the monopoly of traditional voices. Young Muslims now encounter a wide range of religious perspectives, from ultra-conservative preachers to progressive scholars. They can hear a sermon from a sheikh in Cairo, watch a Quran recitation by a 14-year-old in Turkey, then join a theology discussion with a convert in Sweden, all in one evening. This connectivity has created a generation that is both deeply spiritual and deeply skeptical. They ask difficult questions. How do I reconcile my faith with science? What does Islam say about mental health? Can I be LGBTQ and Muslim? Must Islamic law always be state law? How do I handle doubts about God or the Quran? In response, new platforms have emerged: podcasts, online academies, TikTok pages, Instagram dawah accounts, where these discussions unfold without the heavy gatekeeping of previous generations. Some young Muslims find community and healing here. Others spiral into confusion or encounter misinformation. The crisis of religious literacy is real. Many young people feel both deeply attached to Islam and unprepared to live it with confidence in a secular, pluralistic world. However, youth movements also fuel hope. Across the globe, Muslim youth are organizing for environmental justice, refugee rights, political change, education reform, and interfaith peacebuilding. Islam becomes, for many, not a retreat from the world, but a motivation to engage with it. 3. Art, culture, and the revival of the sacred Islam has always inspired creative expression, from the geometric brilliance of mosques to the lyrical beauty of Arabic calligraphy. In the modern era, Islamic arts are seeing a new renaissance across mediums. In visual art, Muslim artists explore identity, exile, spirituality, and protest. Exhibitions in New York, Istanbul, Kuala Lumpur, and London showcase works that merge Quranic themes with abstract expressionism, or reinterpret traditional motifs with postmodern techniques. In music, genres like nasheed, Islamic hip-hop, and Sufi Qawwali have reached new audiences. Artists such as Maher Zain, Kanan, Yusuf Islam Cat Stevens, and others create music that combines devotional lyrics with contemporary styles. In regions like North Africa and West Africa, traditional Islamic musical forms are used for both celebration and resistance. In film and literature, Muslim writers and directors tell stories once silenced or sidelined about faith, struggle, love, and migration. Films such as The Message, Wajda, and Rami, or novels by authors like Layla Abu Lela, Mohsin Hamid, and Alif Shafak, present Muslim characters with nuance, humanity, and moral depth. All of this reflects a cultural reality. Islam is not merely a system of laws and rituals, it is a civilization. One that spans art, thought, cuisine, clothing, architecture, and poetry. Reviving Islamic civilization is not about going backward. It's about bringing the sacred into the present, using the tools and language of today. 4. Reform and conservatism. The ongoing struggle every era in Islamic history has seen the push and pull between reformist and conservative currents. In our time, the clash is more visible due to the internet, mass media, and geopolitical conflict. On one side are conservatives who see any change to Islamic tradition as a threat. They believe that God's law is perfect, timeless, and sufficient as it has always been. Many belong to traditional madrasas, Wahhabi movements, or hardline Salafi groups. Some see democracy, feminism, or secularism as incompatible with Islam. On the other side are reformists who believe that many past interpretations of Islam were influenced by culture, politics, or patriarchy, not divine truth. They call for fresh readings of the Quran, context-aware fiqh jurisprudence, and a critical re-examination of hadith collections. Then there are centrists, scholars and communities seeking a middle path, rooted in tradition but open to rethinking its applications. They argue that blind imitation taqlid is dangerous, but so is innovation without knowledge. Their motto often echoes the prophetic hadith: the best of affairs are the balanced ones. This theological tension has real consequences. It shapes school curricula, women's rights, free speech laws, political participation, and social norms. In some countries, reformists are jailed. In others, conservatives are marginalized. The debate is rarely just about ideas. It's also about power, identity, and control. 5. Islam's future. Between fear and flourishing, what does the future hold for the religion of Islam? Demographically, Islam is growing. Muslim populations are rising in Africa, Asia, and Europe. By 2070, it is projected that Islam will be the world's largest religion. In countries like Nigeria, the balance between Muslim and Christian populations will shape the entire continent's future. Technologically, Islam is integrating with AI, blockchain, and virtual reality. Scholars are debating the permissibility of virtual mosques, digital Qurans, and even AI-generated sermons. Ethical frameworks rooted in Islamic teachings are being proposed to guide tech development. Politically, Islam remains contested. Will there be a successful model of Islamic governance that balances faith, freedom, and justice? Will authoritarian regimes that use Islam to justify repression survive the 21st century? Will the global Ummah move closer to unity or remain divided by nationalism and sectarianism? Spiritually, Islam continues to offer meaning in a world often described as empty or hypermaterialistic. In an age of mental health crises, ecological destruction, and widespread anxiety, many are turning or returning to religion for grounding. The Quran's message of divine purpose, personal responsibility, and ultimate accountability speaks to hearts seeking more than just survival. This moment in the history of Islam is not one of decline, it is one of transition. The old models no longer suffice, and the new ones are not yet formed. The religion is alive, adaptive, and still unfolding. The next chapters will continue to explore the cutting edge, how Islam is entering the conversation about global ethics, climate justice, artificial intelligence, and post-secular societies. The story is far from over, and perhaps, in many ways, it is only just beginning. In this phase of our documentary, we continue to witness Islam in an era defined by transition, where its followers are shaping new paths in response to unprecedented global shifts. As Islam approaches the third millennium of its existence, the religion that emerged from the deserts of Arabia is now entangled with the world's most complex questions: sustainability, equity, technological ethics, cultural pluralism, and global governance. In this section, we'll focus on 5 emerging and defining arenas that will shape Islam's global trajectory in the coming decades: climate and ecological responsibility, artificial intelligence and digital theology, interfaith coalitions and religious diplomacy, Muslim diasporas and dual identities, and the evolution of global Muslim leadership. 1. Climate crisis and Islamic eco-theology as the world confronts worsening ecological disasters, from rising sea levels and heat waves to desertification and mass species extinction. Muslim scholars, activists, and theologians have begun rediscovering Islam's deep-rooted emphasis on environmental stewardship. The Quran repeatedly references nature not only as a creation of God, but as a sign-ire of the divine order. It is He who has made you successors upon the earth to test you in what He has given you. Quran 6, 165. This concept of humans as khalifa, stewards or guardians, imposes a moral and spiritual responsibility to protect the planet. Classical jurists spoke of rights of nature, and the Prophet Muhammad himself issued strict instructions about conservation of water, the sanctity of trees, the treatment of animals, and even environmental cleanliness. In the 21st century, this theology is being revived with urgency. The Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change, 2015, was endorsed by scholars from around the world and called upon Muslims to transition away from fossil fuels, reduce waste, and reform economic systems contributing to ecological imbalance. Grassroots organizations such as Green Muslims, Eco-Islam, and Global Muslim Climate Network are engaging Muslim communities around the world. In countries like Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Senegal, Islamic leaders are working with farmers and fishermen to blend traditional environmental knowledge with Islamic values. Pilgrimage practices are also being scrutinized. The annual Hajj, one of the world's largest mass gatherings, has a significant ecological footprint. In response, efforts are being made to green the pilgrimage through solar-powered tents, waste reduction, and sustainable water systems in Mecca. For many Muslims, the climate crisis is no longer just a policy issue, it is a religious obligation. Preserving the earth is not separate from worship, it is an extension of it. 2. Artificial intelligence and the future of religious practice as AI systems become increasingly integrated into human life, from language processing and image recognition to behavioral prediction and autonomous decision-making. Muslim scholars and ethicists are confronting unprecedented theological questions. Asterisk, can AI issue fatwas legal opinions? Asterisk, should Islamic institutions use AI for automated zakat calculation or virtual counseling? Asterisk, can AI-generated Quranic recitations be considered valid? Asterisk, can a robot lead prayer or act as a teacher of hadith? On one level, AI presents practical opportunities. Machine learning can be used to digitize ancient manuscripts, allowing global access to classical Islamic knowledge. AI voice assistants can help the elderly perform ritual prayers or recite du'as. Algorithms can translate Islamic texts into hundreds of languages instantly. But at a deeper level, concerns about ethical boundaries, spiritual authenticity, and loss of human intentionality emerge. Islamic ritual is fundamentally about niyyah, intention, And many scholars argue that no artificial system can possess the soul, humility, or reverence required to fulfill acts of worship. Others point to the importance of Etihad in developing an Islamic framework for AI ethics, ensuring that AI upholds human dignity, avoids bias, and serves social justice. Conversations about AI and Islam are just beginning, but the need for proactive guidance is urgent, especially as technology increasingly blurs the boundaries between creator and creation. 3. Interfaith dialogue and religious diplomacy in a world rife with conflict, xenophobia, and religious polarization. Interfaith engagement has become one of Islam's most active frontiers, rooted in Quranic principles such as, O mankind, we created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. Quran 49:13. Islamic tradition has long recognized the legitimacy of the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism and Christianity, and acknowledged previous prophets. Modern interfaith efforts build on that foundation, engaging not only with Abrahamic traditions but also with Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, and atheists. Major milestones include the Marrakesh Declaration 2016, which affirmed the rights of non-Muslims living in Muslim-majority societies. The Document on Human Fraternity 2019, signed in Abu Dhabi by Pope Francis and Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb, Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. Calling for global peace and coexistence. The rise of interfaith councils, peacebuilding initiatives, and academic programs that focus on comparative theology and dialogical ethics. Religious diplomacy is also becoming a tool of statecraft. Countries like Qatar, Turkey, Indonesia, and the UAE have positioned themselves as hubs for global interfaith dialogue, using soft power to influence narratives about Islam and position themselves as mediators in religious tensions. In the West, Muslim communities increasingly partner with synagogues, churches, and civic organizations to combat Islamophobia, antisemitism, and racism. Shared activism around refugee rights, environmental justice, and poverty is replacing theological debate with collaborative action. 4. Muslim diasporas. Between homeland and homeland, the global Muslim population now includes over 300 million people living outside of Muslim-majority countries. These diaspora communities have become critical spaces for the development of new Islamic thought, practice, and identity. In cities like Toronto, London, Chicago, Melbourne, and Paris, Muslims of diverse ethnic backgrounds form hybrid communities, where West African, South Asian, Arab, and European traditions blend to create new expressions of faith. Diaspora Muslims often face double scrutiny, from host societies that question their loyalty and from home countries that see them as either corrupted or too liberal. They must navigate what it means to be fully Muslim and fully part of their secular, multicultural societies. This negotiation leads to new practices: women's prayer circles in cafes, Quran study groups in universities, interfaith iftars in public parks, hijab fashion shows, and Eid celebrations that blend cultural and religious heritage with civic pride. It also produces new theological questions. Is it permissible to participate in secular democracy? How do we navigate LGBTQ rights within Islamic ethics? What does Islamic parenting look like in secular societies? Can we pray in a public school? Should we fast during exams? Rather than weakening Islam, this pluralism often strengthens it, by forcing Muslims to reflect more deeply, study more rigorously, and build communities intentionally. The diaspora is not an exile. It is, for many, a space of intellectual freedom, spiritual renewal, and community resilience. 5. The future of global Muslim leadership. For centuries, Islam's leadership was anchored in either the caliphate or traditional centers of learning. But today, global leadership in Islam is fragmented and decentralized. There is no single authority accepted by all Muslims. Instead, leadership is dispersed among political rulers, kings, presidents, emirs, and prime ministers who govern Muslim-majority states, scholars and institutions, Al-Azhar, Deoband, Darul Uloom, Zaytuna, and more, movements, Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat-e-Islami, Tablighi Jamaat, Hizb ut-Tahrir, and others, celebrities and influencers, YouTubers, imams with large social media followings, authors, and public intellectuals. This fragmentation reflects the diversity of the Ummah, but also leaves many without a clear spiritual compass. Younger generations are more likely to find guidance through Google than through a mosque, raising questions about the crisis of authority. In the absence of a unified leadership, Islam's future may depend not on a single figure or institution, but on distributed leadership, networks of scholars, activists, and educators who work collaboratively across borders, platforms, and traditions. This requires trust, intellectual honesty, spiritual humility, and a shared commitment to serving the Ummah, not for power or fame, but for God. These 5 developments are not separate threads. They weave together into a new phase of Islamic history, one that is decentralized but interconnected, traditional yet adaptive, spiritual but engaged. As Islam approaches 1,500 years of continuous existence, it is not retreating. It is expanding, not through conquest, but through hearts, minds, and ideas. It is alive in classrooms and courtrooms, on stages and screens, in street protests, and in silent prostration. The path ahead is not without obstacles. Internal division, external hostility, moral confusion, and environmental collapse threaten all communities. But Islam, as it has throughout its long and turbulent history, will continue to rise and adapt. It will remain, as it has always claimed to be, not a relic of the past, but a living message for humanity. As we enter this next stretch of the journey, the story of Islam becomes increasingly marked by fluidity, movement across borders, ideas across media, and communities across generations. Islam is no longer primarily shaped by governments, clerics, or monarchs. It is now being shaped by millions of believers in quiet, daily acts, online, in their homes, and in their cities. This section explores 5 final and maturing themes that define Islam's current position in history and hint at its evolving future. Muslim women's rising agency, conversion and reversion trends, Islam and mental health, post-conflict Islam, and Islam's cultural soft power in the 21st century. 1. Muslim women, agents of revival and redefinition. One of the most defining aspects of Islam's modern story is the transformation of women's roles within religious, social, and intellectual spaces. While the early Muslim community included influential women like Khadija, the Prophet's wife and first believer, Aisha, the transmitter of thousands of hadiths, and Fatima, his daughter, the following centuries saw a gradual decline in the visibility and authority of women in religious leadership. In the 21st century, that dynamic is being reversed, not by breaking with tradition, but by returning to it with renewed confidence. Women across the Muslim world are reclaiming their places as Quranic scholars mufassirat, hadith specialists muhadithat, legal experts faqihat, spiritual teachers murabbiya, and preachers, judges, and activists. In Morocco, women known as murshidat are trained by the state to lead religious education and offer counseling in mosques. In Indonesia, the Rahima Network works to empower women religious teachers with gender-sensitive Islamic knowledge. In Nigeria, women like Amina J. Mohammed and Maryam Uwais use Islamic ethics in governance and justice reform. Meanwhile, online platforms have become new pulpits. Muslim women preachers with millions of followers address marriage, mental health, spirituality, and scripture interpretation from a woman's perspective, often challenging centuries of male-dominated exegesis. This shift is not without backlash. Conservative forces, both male and female, sometimes accuse such movements of bitter innovation or westernization. But for many, the drive is not toward imitation of the West, but toward internal liberation, reclaiming Islam as a source of empowerment, not limitation. Hijab, for instance, continues to be a subject of debate and activism. In France, some Muslim women fight for the right to wear it. In Iran, others fight for the right to remove it. In both cases, the core message is the same. Let women speak for themselves, and let Islam not be used as a tool of coercion. 2. Conversions, reversions, and the new faces of Islam. Islam continues to grow rapidly not only through births, but also through conversion. In Europe and North America, Islam is the fastest growing religion by conversion. In the US, roughly a quarter of all Muslim adults are converts. In the UK, converts include people from a wide range of ethnic and socio-economic backgrounds, some drawn by the clarity of Islamic theology, others by its discipline, community, or social justice teachings. Many converts describe their journey as a reversion, pointing to the Islamic belief that every human is born in a state of fitra, natural submission to God. In this view, conversion is not the adoption of something foreign, but a return to one's original nature. Prominent examples include Yusuf Islam Cat Stevens, who left pop superstardom for a deeply private spiritual life. Malcolm X, whose pilgrimage to Mecca transformed his vision of racial justice and helped internationalize the African-American Muslim struggle. Lauren Booth, British journalist and sister-in-law of Tony Blair, who embraced Islam after a spiritual awakening in Palestine. Conversion also brings challenges: tension with family, racial prejudice within Muslim communities, and lack of institutional support. Many converts struggle to integrate into mosque cultures that are often centered on specific ethnicities or languages. In response, convert-focused communities and educational programs have emerged to offer solidarity and guidance. Islam's appeal among converts underscores a broader truth, that the religion is not culturally bound but universally accessible. It speaks to human questions that transcend geography. Who am I? Why do I suffer? What is my purpose? How should I live? 3. Islam and the mental health renaissance. For much of Islamic history, mental health was approached with remarkable sophistication. Scholars like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina Avicenna wrote detailed texts on psychological disorders, combining spiritual, physiological, and behavioral models of care. Hospitals in the medieval Muslim world included treatment centers for mental illness, often emphasizing compassion, sound diet, talk therapy, and spiritual healing. Yet over time, stigma grew. In many modern Muslim societies, mental illness came to be seen primarily through a spiritual lens, as the result of weak faith, evil eye, or possession, rather than as a medical or emotional condition. Today, a renaissance is underway. Muslim therapists, psychologists, and imams are working to bridge Islamic spirituality with contemporary psychology. They promote a biopsychosocial spiritual model, integrating Islamic teachings on patience sabr, trust in God tawakkul, and inner purification tazkiyah with cognitive behavioral therapy and trauma-informed care. Topics once considered taboo: depression, anxiety, abuse, addiction, suicidal thoughts, are now being openly addressed through sermons, support groups, social media, and mental health clinics. Religious figures are being trained in pastoral counseling. Some countries now include Islamic-based mental health programs in prisons, refugee camps, and schools. For young Muslims especially, this shift is vital. They are seeking not only legal answers, but emotional healing. They want to know how to deal with heartbreak, burnout, parental expectations, identity confusion, and spiritual dryness, not just how to perform ritual. Islam, when presented as a path of wholeness, not just rules, becomes a refuge in a chaotic world. 4. Post-conflict Islam. Healing after war and violence in many regions, Islam's recent history is marked by conflict, wars, coups, occupations, and sectarian strife. From Iraq and Syria to Afghanistan, Yemen, and Sudan, Muslims have not only suffered from global powers, but also from one another. This has left generations traumatized, displaced, and skeptical of both political and religious leadership. Yet from these ashes, efforts are emerging to rebuild, reconcile, and heal. In Iraq, local imams and tribal elders have launched truth and reconciliation initiatives between Sunni and Shia communities torn apart by civil war. In Bosnia, post-genocide Muslim communities engage in interethnic rebuilding with Christian and secular neighbors. In Palestine, despite decades of occupation, Islamic charities and educators sustain moral resistance rooted in patience and justice, not vengeance. Islamic peacebuilding is now a growing field, combining traditional concepts such as Islah reconciliation, Shura consultation, and Rama mercy with modern frameworks like restorative justice, trauma care, and post-conflict governance. In these efforts, Islam is not part of the problem, it is part of the solution. Its values of forgiveness, communal obligation, and nonviolence are being recentered by a new generation of leaders who understand that true dawah in post-conflict zones begins with compassion, not law. 5. Islam's cultural soft power in the global imagination. In the global arena, Islam's soft power, its ability to influence through culture, values, and ideas rather than coercion, has grown significantly. Muslim fashion, long associated with conservative or modest dress, is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. Designers from Istanbul, Jakarta, Dubai, and London lead global fashion shows featuring elegant abayas, colorful hijabs, and ethical, sustainable clothing lines. Brands like Haute Hijab and Dina Tokyo have become household names. Muslim cuisine, from biryani and couscous to sambusas and satay, is now celebrated globally, often paired with hospitality rooted in Islamic adab etiquette. Food festivals during Ramadan, halal tourism, and culinary diplomacy showcase Islam not through doctrine, but through joy and beauty. Cinema, art, and literature are more prominent than ever. Shows like Rami Mo and We Are Lady Parts bring Muslim characters to life with authenticity, humor, and vulnerability. Graphic novels, memoirs, and poetry collections explore the diasporic and inner lives of Muslims navigating love, faith, and migration. These cultural expressions play a subtle but profound role. They challenge stereotypes, build empathy, and create space for Islam to be seen not as the other, but as part of the shared human story. As we approach the closing chapters of this vast and ongoing history, one truth echoes across time. Islam was never static. From the plains of Arabia to the cities of the world, from the deserts of revolution to the streets of protest, from classical books to viral videos, Islam is both a memory and a movement. Its core remains constant: oneness of God, prophethood of Muhammad, mercy, justice, submission. But its expressions are as diverse as the people who live it. What remains is not the question of whether Islam will survive. It is the question of how it will continue to shape and be shaped by the world to come. As we continue into the final stretch of this historical journey, we are no longer simply recounting the story of Islam's past. We are looking directly into its unfolding present and imagining the shape of its future. Across centuries, Islam has been many things: a prophetic movement, a civilization, a resistance, a law, a culture, a spiritual path, and a global identity. In this part of the narrative, we explore Islam's present as a framework for navigating the future. This section will explore 5 crucial dimensions of Islam's emerging future: Islam and global ethics, revival of the Maqasid higher objectives of Sharia, the quest for political models beyond the caliphate, the digital Islamic public sphere, and Islam as a moral and civilizational response to global crises. 1. Islam and global ethics. From ritual to responsibility in the 21st century, the moral questions humanity faces are increasingly universal. Global inequality, refugee crises, climate collapse, nuclear weapons, AI domination, surveillance capitalism, and mass spiritual disconnection. What role does Islam play in these conversations? Modern Islamic thinkers have begun reclaiming Islam not simply as a set of private obligations, prayer, fasting, pilgrimage, but as a moral philosophy, a theory of civilization, and a global ethical system. Islamic ethics, rooted in the Quran and Sunnah, provide principles that extend well beyond the masjid. Asterisk justice, adl as a universal command. Asterisk mercy, rahmah as the default mode of all interaction. Asterisk trust, amana as the basis of public leadership. Asterisk stewardship, khilafah of the earth and of each other. Asterisk consultation, shura in governance and community affairs. Asterisk dignity, karama, for every human being regardless of religion or race. These concepts are not abstract. They are increasingly being used to challenge unethical systems, whether corrupt dictatorships in the Muslim world or exploitative capitalist systems that violate Islamic economic principles of fairness, risk-sharing, and prohibition of exploitation. In global forums, Muslim scholars and institutions are beginning to make the case for an Islamic contribution to world ethics in trade, diplomacy, technology, and ecology. Rather than apologizing for Islam's legal code, they emphasize its moral vision, one of balance, dignity, and universal accountability before God. 2. The return to Maqasid, higher objectives of Sharia. One of the most significant intellectual renewals in recent Islamic history is the rediscovery and emphasis on the Maqasid al-Shari'ah, the higher objectives or purposes of Islamic law. Traditionally, Sharia was interpreted through specific rulings derived from the Quran, Hadith, and consensus Amma. But this led, over time, to a hyper-legalistic approach, in which form often overtook substance. Today, scholars are reviving the Maqasid framework to shift the emphasis from mechanical compliance to ethical intention. The classical Maqasid include asterisk preservation of religion hifz, al-din asterisk preservation of life hifz, al-nafs asterisk preservation of intellect hifz, al-aql asterisk preservation of lineage/family hifz, al-nasl asterisk preservation of wealth hifz, al-mal. Some scholars now propose additional objectives relevant to the modern age. Asterisk preservation of dignity, asterisk preservation of the environment, asterisk preservation of diversity and pluralism. This Maqasid approach is being applied in a variety of fields: criminal justice, education, economics, urban planning, to ensure that Islamic law remains adaptive, responsive, and human-centered. It empowers reform from within tradition, rather than relying on external secular frameworks. For instance, in areas like women's rights, minority protections, or freedom of expression, Maqasid-based reasoning allows for flexibility while staying grounded in scripture. It bridges the gap between orthodoxy and conscience, between loyalty to divine law and fidelity to human dignity. 3. Beyond the Caliphate. New political imaginations. Since the abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924, Muslims have struggled with the question: what is the ideal political model for Islam? For over 13 centuries, the Caliphate served as both a symbol of unity and a mechanism of rule. But modern realities, nation-states, international law, human rights norms, and secular governance have made the classical caliphate difficult to revive in practice, even if it remains a potent symbol in many minds. Several models have emerged in response: asterisk Islamic republics, e.g., Iran, Pakistan, attempting to blend modern constitutional structures with Islamic principles; asterisk Islamic monarchies, e.g., Saudi Arabia, Morocco, where kings or emirs claim religious legitimacy; asterisk secular democracies with Islamic identity, e.g., Indonesia, Tunisia, where Islam is the majority religion but not enforced through state law; Asterisk revivalist calls for a renewed caliphate, e.g. Hiss Tory. ISIS, often rejected by mainstream scholars and the wider Muslim public. Contemporary Islamic political theorists are now calling for creative, post-caliphate models, systems based on consultation, shura, social justice, transparency, and ethical governance, not bound by medieval forms but faithful to Quranic values. These models emphasize goals over structures. The legitimacy of a government, in this view, does not rest on titles or claims to lineage, but on serving the people, upholding justice, and protecting the weak, which was the essence of the Prophet Muhammad's state in Medina. 4. The digital Islamic public sphere. Islam has always flourished in public spaces: the mosque, the market, the madrasa, the court. Today, however, the most influential Islamic public space is online. The internet has created a new ummah, not defined by geography, ethnicity, or school of thought, but by interaction. Every day, millions of Muslims engage in religious debates, watch sermons, share hadiths, ask fatwas, and create memes on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Telegram, Twitter, and Instagram. This digital space has several key features: asterisk decentralization of authority. Anyone can speak in the name of Islam. Asterisk algorithmic amplification. Controversial, emotional, or extreme views often spread faster than nuanced ones. Asterisk instant access. Quran translations, tafsir, fiqh libraries, and prayer apps are available globally. Asterisk hybrid communities. Diaspora Muslims create spaces that reflect both their local and global identities. While this has democratized Islamic knowledge, it has also created noise, misinformation, and confusion. Many young Muslims now get their religious education from influencers rather than scholars. Debates once held in scholarly circles are now public, emotional, and polarizing. In response, some scholars are working to reclaim digital space through verified fatwa services, digital madrasas, curated content platforms, and online ijazah certification programs. The future will likely see the emergence of digital muftis, VR pilgrimages, Islamic AI assistants, and metaverse mosques. These innovations may spark theological debate, but they are inevitable. The question will not be whether Islam can exist in the digital age. It already does, but how well it can preserve its soul in virtual form. 5. Islam as a civilizational ethic in a fractured world. As we approach the conclusion of this long journey, we return to the central idea. Islam is more than a religion. It is a civilizational ethic, a way of living, thinking, governing, and aspiring that touches all dimensions of human life. In a world fragmented by nationalism, hyper-individualism, and moral fatigue, many people, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, are looking for meaning beyond consumption, community beyond identity politics, and values beyond relativism. Islam offers answers: balance between body and soul, dignity for the rich and the poor alike, a spiritual purpose that embraces both solitude and service, a vision of justice that is not revenge but restoration, a connection to the divine that empowers the human, not enslaves it. The Prophet Muhammad's final sermon, delivered during the farewell pilgrimage, still echoes across centuries. All mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have any superiority over an Arab. You are all brothers. This ethic of unity, equality, and divine accountability is perhaps Islam's greatest contribution to humanity, a reminder, in a fractured age, that our strength lies in submission to a truth greater than ourselves, and our salvation lies in our service to one another. We are nearing the conclusion of this massive historical journey. In the final two parts, we will reflect on Islam's internal pluralism, its ongoing global role, and what history teaches us about its inevitable transformation. With nearly a millennium and a half behind it, the religion of Islam has undergone transformations that few belief systems in human history have matched. It has served as a foundation for empires and revolutions, governed vast populations, produced global scientific advancements, shaped philosophical schools, inspired the world's art and architecture, and guided the personal lives of billions. Now, in the penultimate chapter of this extensive historical journey, we explore the final themes necessary to understand Islam's current pluralism, its relationship with modernity and postmodernity, and its potential role as a source of resilience, reconciliation, and renewal in an increasingly unstable world. This section will focus on 5 interconnected threads: Islam's internal plurality, the Islamic spirit in postmodern philosophy, resacralization of society, Islam as refuge in a collapsing world, the timeless appeal of divine alignment. 1. Islam's internal plurality. Many paths, one direction. One of the enduring characteristics of Islam, often overlooked by both outsiders and its own followers, is its immense internal diversity. Despite a common creed, La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammadur Rasul Allah, Islam is practiced in remarkably different ways across cultures, traditions, and ideologies. Sunni and Shia traditions, the initial political disagreement over leadership after the Prophet's death, developed over centuries into theological, legal, and cultural distinctions between Sunni and Shia Muslims. Yet both share the 5 pillars of Islam, revere the Quran, honor the Prophet, and uphold a similar cosmology. Within Shia Islam, there are branches: Twelvers, Ismailis, Zaydis. Among Sunnis, we find the 4 classical madhabs legal schools: Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali, each with its interpretative principles, yet all recognized as valid. Sufism and mystical traditions, running parallel across both Sunni and Shia lines, is the mystical tradition of Sufism, a deeply personal, inward-focused path emphasizing purification of the soul, love of God, and direct experiential knowledge. Though Sufi practices differ from region to region, Qawwali music in South Asia, zikr circles in Turkey, silent retreats in North Africa, they all aim to awaken the heart and polish the soul. Sufism has produced saints, poets, and philosophers whose words remain etched in global consciousness: Rumi, Rabi' al-Adawi, al-Ghazali, Ibn Arabi. Salafi and reformist currents, in contrast to mystical and juridical traditions, the Salafi movement calls for a return to the earliest generation of Muslims, al-Salaf al-Sali, often rejecting innovations, bid'ah, and emphasizing literalist interpretations. It flourished in the 18th and 19th centuries as a response to colonialism and internal stagnation, and continues today in various forms, from quietist spirituality to hardline political ideologies. Reformist thinkers like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, Muhammad Abda, Rashid Rida, and later Malik Benabi and Fazlur Rahman emerged to offer new frameworks, emphasizing rationality, democracy, ijtihad, and contextual reinterpretation of the Sharia. This plurality is not a weakness. It reflects Islam's capacity to adapt without dissolving, to remain anchored in Tawhid, the oneness of God, while accommodating human diversity in space and time. 2. The Islamic spirit in postmodern philosophy. While Islam developed in the classical and medieval world, many of its fundamental ideas are now being re-evaluated in the light of postmodernity. In a world increasingly skeptical of objectivity, grand narratives, and institutional authority, Islam's spiritual philosophy is experiencing a resurgence, not despite postmodern trends, but because of them. Thinkers like Sayyid Hossein Nasr have long argued that the modern world suffers from a loss of the sacred. Islam offers a worldview where every act, every breath is meaningful, connected to divine purpose. In Islam, truth is not merely intellectual, but moral and metaphysical. Knowing is not complete until it leads to humility. In postmodern contexts where nihilism, consumerism, and alienation thrive, many find in Islam a coherent cosmology. God is the origin, the sustainer, and the end. An ethical universe. Actions matter. Every deed is recorded. a sacred language. The Quran remains word for word as it was revealed, an eternal human model, the Prophet Muhammad, not as a myth, but as a documented historical human exemplar. Islam doesn't seek to dominate the postmodern mind, it seeks to ground it, to remind it that beauty is real, that suffering is not meaningless, and that justice is not a construct, it's a command. 3. Resacralization. Reintroducing God to public life, modern secular societies have steadily pushed religion into the private sphere. Public discourse often excludes God altogether, from education, media, law, and policy. This secularization was believed to be the path toward pluralism and rational governance. And yet, in recent years, a reverse current is emerging, what some call resacralization. As systems built purely on materialism, nationalism, or market economics fail to nourish the soul or protect the planet, people are turning back to the divine, not only privately but politically, artistically, and communally. Islam offers a way to reintegrate the sacred, not through coercion, but through meaning. In Islam, governance is sacred because leaders are accountable to God. Commerce is sacred because cheating is a spiritual failure. Marriage is sacred because it mirrors divine mercy. Charity is sacred because wealth is a trust. This does not require theocracy. It requires a shift in consciousness, that God is not a private concept but a public reality, that human beings are not accidental chemicals but moral agents. That success is not measured in GDP or likes, but in sincerity and righteousness. 4. Islam as a refuge in a collapsing world across the globe. Cracks are appearing in the dominant systems. Ecological collapse threatens all life. Economic inequality is at historic highs. Trust in politics, media, and science is falling. Mental health crises are soaring, especially among youth. Families are fragmented, identities unstable, meaning elusive. In this context, Islam is quietly becoming a refuge, not an escape into fantasy or dogma, but a shelter made of ritual, scripture, community, and discipline. 5 daily prayers mark the passage of time. Fasting builds empathy and willpower. Zakat connects one to the poor. The Quran offers clarity in a world of noise. The Prophet's example models compassion, dignity, and strength. For many, reverts, refugees, intellectuals, workers, Islam becomes the only unchanging thing in a changing world. It asks for surrender, but gives in return order, purpose, belonging, and hope. 5. The timeless appeal of divine alignment at its heart. Islam is not merely about being Muslim as an identity. It's about Islam, literally, surrender, submission, alignment with the divine will. This is what gives Islam its timeless and global reach. It does not require race, language, or birthplace. It does not promise ease or wealth. It promises peace through struggle. It does not separate body and soul, mind and heart, private and public. It integrates them. It does not require blind faith. It invites inquiry, then certitude. This is why a teenager in Brazil can recite the same words as a scholar in Egypt, why a woman in New Zealand wears hijab out of love, not fear, why a man in Nigeria prays 5 times daily even amid war. The world is full of competing ideologies, but Islam does not compete, it calls. It calls the human being to recognize that life is short, that death is near, that justice matters, that truth exists, and that God is closer than your jugular vein. And it offers a path, not to domination, but to liberation, not to dogma, but to divine nearness, not to hatred, but to mercy. In the final chapter, we will summarize Islam's historical arc, reflect on its lessons for humanity, and contemplate what this vast journey tells us about the future of faith. And so, we come to the final chapter of this immense, continuous, and ever-evolving story, the history of Islam. A history that spans nearly 15 centuries, connects dozens of civilizations, embraces every continent, and speaks to the deepest questions of the human soul. This last chapter will not offer a conclusion, because Islam's story is not finished. Instead, it will reflect on its historical arc, the lessons it offers humanity, and the unfolding nature of faith in a world racing toward the unknown. The historical arc. From revelation to renewal. In the beginning, there was a man alone in a cave, seeking truth in a world of noise. When revelation came to Muhammad, it was not power or politics that arrived first. It was a command to read, to reflect, to rise. Islam began with words, not weapons, with consciousness, not conquest. From that seed in the 7th century Arabian desert grew one of the most expansive civilizations in human history. Within a few decades, the message of the Quran reached the walls of Constantinople and the rivers of Central Asia. But what expanded was not just territory, it was culture, science, poetry, law, and spirituality. Islam became the lifeblood of empires and the song of wandering mystics. It inspired mosques that touched the sky, universities that outlived kingdoms, and legal systems that governed diverse peoples for centuries. It produced scholars who mapped the stars and surgeons who healed the blind. It gave the world algebra, optics, and ethics, but it also faced decline. Empires fell, civil wars burned, colonialism looted and humiliated. The 20th century scattered the Ummah across borders it never chose. The 21st century tested its identity in every direction, extremism on one side, secularism on the other, and silence in between. And yet, Islam endured. Because it was never merely historical, it was existential. It survives not in marble minarets or scholarly texts, but in the simple moment when a believer whispers Bismillah before a task, or when a child first opens the Quran, or when a refugee kneels on the ground, facing a direction that gives her hope. What history teaches humanity, the history of Islam is not a triumphalist tale, nor is it a saga of victimhood. It is, more accurately, a mirror, a reflection of what humanity is capable of when it is aligned with higher purpose, and what it risks when it loses that axis. What do we learn? 1. Truth endures beyond power. Empires that embraced Islam rose and fell. Scholars were honored, then exiled. Mosques were built, then destroyed. But the Quran has never changed. The rituals have never ceased. Even under siege, even in exile, the call to prayer rises. 2. Diversity is not a threat. It is a strength. From Andalusia to Mali, from Persia to China, Islam adapted, absorbed, and elevated local cultures. It spoke in hundreds of tongues, wore different clothes, and expressed itself through architecture, cuisine, and music. Its unity was never uniformity. It was a harmony of hearts around the same light. 3. Faith is not isolation. It is integration. The greatest Muslims in history were not separatists. They engaged with the world. They ruled justly, wrote deeply, traded ethically, healed bodies and souls. They did not see Islam as retreat, but as guidance within the world's struggles. 4. Spirituality must lead politics, not the other way around. Whenever Islam became a tool for control, division, or ego, it lost its soul. Whenever it returned to humility, mercy, and the prophetic model, it healed societies. Muhammad ruled Medina, but he swept his own floor, forgave enemies, and wept in prayer. His leadership was spiritual authority, not domination. 5. The future of Islam is already here. It lives in quiet acts. In the refugee rebuilding his life with dignity. In the convert who finds God in a foreign language. In the mother teaching her children to pray. In the youth questioning, doubting, searching, and still showing up to pray. In every person who chooses God, not because they were told to, but because they believe. A world in crisis and a faith that endures. Today's world is wounded. We face crises in climate, trust, truth, meaning. Institutions are crumbling. Empires are declining. Certainties are fading. In this chaos, many run to distraction, to ideology, to despair. Islam calls instead to submission, not to kings or systems, but to God. It offers a still center in a spinning world. In the final verse revealed to the prophet, the message was, "This day I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you, and have approved for you Islam as your way." Quran 5:3. That message has not changed. It is recited in millions of voices daily, echoing across cities, deserts, jungles, and coastlines. What began in a cave now lives in hearts across the earth. Final words. What Islam is not a brand. It is not a nation. It is not owned by clerics or inherited by blood. It is a choice to bow, to listen, to remember, to walk with humility and stand with courage, to speak the truth and live for something greater than the self. In a time when everything feels temporary, Islam remains a permanent alignment with what is eternal. And so the history of Islam does not end here. It continues in you, in us, in all who seek, who question, who hope. And if there is one constant through every century of this story, it is this: there is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God. Everything else changes. That never does.